Welcome to being at home with George during the time of COVID. And as I like to say, this is an opportunity, a time for us to really understand that no matter what happens, COVID or otherwise, good, the bad, the ugly, we can embrace it, say yes to it, and at the same time generate hope. And last week we talked about anxiety as a stepping stone, not as a roadblock. And I want to continue with that theme and talk about, well, how do we do that? And so I want to introduce us to a theory that I've talked about in the past called the Broaden and Build theory by Robert Fredrickson. And this theory says that when we cultivate or when our mindset includes positive emotions like happiness, joy, interest, curiosity, and just seeking to understand, seeking wisdom, even seeking meaning, reflecting on it, that when we do that, it broadens our awareness and it's the opposite of anxiety, which is narrowing, withdrawing, and pulling back. It opens up our awareness and it also gives us access to creativity. So we start exploring and looking at thoughts. Our thoughts are expanded. And because we expand, we're in this place of discovery, this place of relating to things in a way where we start to have more answers. So instead of, I like to use the analogy of a TV where, when you have anxiety, you're stuck on channel 5. And when you do the Broaden and Build theory, you realize you have hundreds of channels. And not to get overwhelmed, but you expand it. And that expansion and that panoramic view, you start to see, oh, okay, there's options for me. I can do this. I can do that. I'd like to talk about happiness. And Shawn Achor has done a lot of research in the happiness realm. And we have this idea, and I've been operating on this idea for a long time, that when we are successful or when something happens, then we can be happy, then we can exhale. When the research says the opposite, that we're happy first, then we're successful. So how do we cultivate happiness? And so it's interesting when I think about that. And why is happiness so important? Because when we talk about the Broaden and Build theory, when we talk about seeing anxiety as a stepping stone, not a roadblock, that's an interpretation. Anxiety is there, it's our relationship to it. So when we can interpret it in a way where we see it as a stepping stone and we see it as an opportunity to grow and to evolve and to express ourselves, totally changes everything. Because we know that 90% of our long-term happiness is predicated on how our nervous system and brain interprets our experience. Not 10%, 90%. So if we're in the right frame of mind, if we have, I like to call it micro, if we're motivated, if we're interested, if we're confident, if we're relaxed and observant, then we're in the growth mindset. And then the Broaden and Build theory is there. And so we're seeing the options, we're seeing things that we wouldn't see if we were in flight or fight or the survival mode. And so the Broaden and Build, what it does, from my experience, is that these positive emotions get us out of survival mode. It actually gets us into thrive mode. So we don't just survive, we thrive. And that's been my experience, in my recovery. And when I deal with medical issues or traumas or people dying in my life or whatever, is just being able to see it in a way with this positive psychology, as Robert Fredrickson talks about, is just by cultivating happiness. And there's a lot of ways to be happy, and most of it is just being in the moment and enjoying the moment, anticipating that things are going to work out, especially when we think about the idea that the universe is friendly and the glass is half full. And by being in a half full, we're in that Broaden and Build, and we see things and we have this energy. So we're happy, then we're successful. But at the same time, I see it as a joy of discovery. So when I start to understand how I work, when I learned how my mind and body are connected, and that even though I couldn't regulate my heartbeat directly, but just by being able to focus on one thing and learning how to self-regulated thoughts and feelings and even images, that there was ways that I could relate to my experience in ways, self-generated thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that allowed me to be in the rest and digest versus the fight, flight, or freeze, that allows me to open up and to see things, and especially to see that I have this ability to step back and observe things. So that enhanced self-awareness and this ability to be able to play out scenarios that are positive and that are geared towards how do I use this as a way of leveling up or stepping up my game or actually being able to express myself even more. So anxiety is not the issue, it's how we interpret what it means. And if we can see it meaning that we're closer to our goal, it's just one side of the coin where one side is potential and freedom and the other side is uncertainty or anxiety. If we embrace that and say, okay, the only way out is through, and it's to understand what this means. So if I approach the anxiety with interest, curiosity, with a sense of wanting, seeking to understand, this is what I've done with my recovery coming up on 37 years, embracing it and saying, okay, I have these issues, but what's the lesson? What do I learn? That's a growth mindset coming from love of learning, learning to love. And this whole idea of just generating interest, like, oh, what is this? How can I relate to it in a way that empowers me, that allows me to express myself and to share what I've learned with others, so that if 90% of our long-term happiness is predicated on how we interpret our experience, then we need to get busy with getting in the right mindset so we interpret things in ways that gives us access to happiness. And it's like a beneficial cycle. Is because we're happy, we're successful, and because we're successful, we're even more happier. And because we explore, we investigate, we open up, and we observe, we learn things. And because we learn things, the joy of learning, the joy of discovery enhances my ability to continue to move more into discovery, more into seeking to understand what things mean, and following or chasing this, not chasing, but allowing myself to have access to excellence. But it all starts with my mind being in the right frame, or being in a positive mind state. Shawn Achor calls it positive genius. How do I generate wholesome thoughts, thoughts of interest, curiosity, love, compassion, wisdom? And by doing that, doesn't matter what comes up. It's if I can create space between stimulus and response, what we talked about. In that space, I can choose happiness. I can choose to look at things as a stepping stone, not as a roadblock. And that attitude gives me latitude. And so it's really about this idea of anxiety is a stepping stone, and that's a choice, just to focus on what we can do, what we want, not on what we don't want or what we can't do. And by doing that, it opens us up, which is the opposite of withdrawing, closing us down, which anxiety does. So to be able to use the anxiety to open up and to not only use the positive emotions to enhance our survival or to survive, we can use those positive emotions, like in my experience, of using it to thrive. So I was fortunate because when I got into recovery, I had been living in my own little fantasy world, and I wasn't really present to things. But the day I got out of the detox and I walked home, I saw my house for the first time. And then I just embraced this idea of wanting to really understand how I was able to overcome my addiction. And I just got interested in my life and other people's lives. So I just had this need to be intellectually stimulated. I don't know, it just came out of nowhere. And one of the first things I did was, instead of like what I would do is I would read a paragraph or study something, and then I'd just do it once. And if I didn't understand it, that was it. And I gave myself permission to say, you can read it as many times as you want because you want to understand it. And what happened was, when I did that and I started understanding things, then I got more confident. And then I wanted to really continue to do that, just to learn something. And of course, I got into reading a book a week for the last 37 years because I was paying attention. I was actually in my body and listening to myself. I saw myself having this need to understand, this need to be intellectually stimulated, to use my mind more and not just be mindless and act like a robot. And so when I started to have that need, I addressed it. I said, okay, so how do I fill that need? How do I address that need? And seeking to understand was the way that happened for me. And then now I understand it, that I'm pursuing excellence and wisdom with grace and ease. But back then, it was just like just a little voice saying, well, what is that? How do you do this? Why do people get motivated to do? Why did it take me so long before I figured out how I can change my life, how I can move out of where I was? So there was this need to be intellectually stimulated. And of course, then I started changing my mind and living that positive, focusing on the love, focusing on the idea that I was in a hell for many years and now I was out. So I was just like, I was just happy. So the happiness was there and the enjoyment was there because I was actually dealing with life in a way without substances. And it was amazing. It felt really good. I was happy. And I think that happiness enhanced my ability to actually go back to school and to study and to continue to pursue things. And I think I went from survival into being able to thrive and to seek it. And so even now, I feel like I'm more excited and enthusiastic about life. No matter what happens, I get to choose how to relate to it as a stepping stone instead of a roadblock. And by doing that, I get more self-efficacy, more stress hardiness. And so surviving is not an issue. It's more about thriving and living creatively and fully. And that's what the Broaden and Build theory has done for me. It's just a little bit of happiness, a little bit of joy. But what I say to myself now is joy now or never. So I can enjoy the moment. I can take it and say, okay, this is what's happening, but I get to choose my attitude and how I relate to it.